Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. I love hearing all this conversation, especially with artists and about art. Welcome. Thank you all for being here today. This event is Coasts in Crisis, Art and Conversation After Recent Hurricanes. I'm Charlotte Rogers, Assistant Professor of Spanish and convener of the Greater Caribbean Studies Network here at the University of Virginia. This event is the first in a week-long series called Convergences, Sciences, Arts, and Humanities in Conversation, which you can learn more about by visiting the link that's included in your program. I'd like to thank our generous sponsors, the Environmental Resilience Institute, UVA Arts and the Office of the Provost and Vice Provost for the Arts, the Coastal Futures Conservatory, the Americas Center, the Department of Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, and the McIntyre Department of Art. You can see we have a very wide range of sponsors for this multidisciplinary event. The staff of the Fralin Museum helped to prepare and install the art that you see around you. And the graduate students from Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, led by Carolyn Whitcomb, took care of all the essential details. So thank you, all of you. I also want to note that many of the books and the art that you see around you are for sale. So please talk to me afterwards if you would like to make a purchase. Also, since you can take some of these works home, we ask you not to take film or video or photography of them during the show. So now that the formalities are out of the way, I know that sometimes when a lot of people gather together in a space, it's common to avoid talking about the elephant in the room. Today, we don't have an actual elephant, but we do have a woolly mammoth, which is hiding behind the screen directly behind me. You might see a tusk poking out over my left shoulder. This woolly mammoth has a story. It's made of cardboard, and it was made by students from the art department for the anthropology department. Once upon a time in the 19th century, this space was the Brooks Museum of Anthropology, and it contained a massive plaster woolly mammoth in this corner. So this cardboard mammoth is actually an homage to the long since destroyed plaster woolly mammoth. It was destroyed back in 1948. Okay. So in addition to checking out the woolly mammoth, I hope that all of you have had a chance to walk around and to see the artwork displayed in the room. I find it to be especially powerful work now that it's hurricane season again. Over the last few weeks, I know all of us have watched Hurricane Dorian devastate the Bahamas. And I'd like to just pause for a moment to remember the more than 50 people who died in that storm, and the 1,300 people who are still missing on the Bahamian islands of Ataco and Grand Bahama. Okay. The artists who are gathered here today all know what the peoples of the Bahamas are going through. Each artist you'll meet was affected personally by Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017. In fact, today is the second anniversary of Hurricane Maria's arrival in the Caribbean. You'll notice in our program that more than half of the artists are from Puerto Rico, while others are from Florida and St. Croix. Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands bore the brunt of Hurricanes Maria and Irma, and the failed response to the storm by both federal and local governments. More than 4,000 people died as a direct or indirect result of Hurricane Maria, and many people in the Caribbean lived nearly a year without electricity or running water. While Puerto Rico received much of the national and international press coverage, the Virgin Islands and Dominica suffered equally, and they did so outside of the scrutinizing light of media coverage. We're all here today in part because climate change has made hurricanes more frequent and more powerful in the 21st century. The effects of this global warming are felt across the planet, but peoples of low-lying coasts and islands of the greater Caribbean are especially vulnerable to rising sea levels and tropical storms. Hurricanes are not merely natural disasters. Their impact depends on human factors. So as a result, hurricane damage replicates and exacerbates existing inequalities in our societies. Hurricane destruction disproportionately affects low-income people of color. And to understand why that is, we have to understand a little bit about Caribbean history. Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands have been colonies since the time of Columbus. The resulting legacies of slavery, financial exploitation, and environmental degradation are apparent today in the ways Caribbean lives and landscapes are discounted in the aftermath of a hurricane. If all this sounds really abstract, let me just mention that all of the participants in today's event carry US passports, but most of them are denied the full benefits of citizenship. Even in the 21st century, Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands remain de facto American colonies. So, as a recent court decision proclaimed about 100 years ago, these islands all, and I quote, belong to but are not part of the United States. US citizens who live on these islands receive less post-hurricane aid than their mainland counterparts. And most importantly, an estimated 4 million of them are not allowed to vote in congressional or presidential elections. Think about what that means. In the wake of the 2017 hurricanes, this disenfranchisement has allowed the US government to push through pro-business policies that eviscerate education, healthcare, and public pensions on the islands. This phenomenon is known as disaster capitalism. So I'm going to ask you for just one more minute to think about this situation in terms of a meteorological phrase, the cone of uncertainty, which is known mellifluously in Spanish as el cono de la incertidumbre. Weather forecasters use this term to refer to the unpredictable paths of hurricanes. Yet, I think that the cone of uncertainty perfectly describes the kind of limbo American colonialism forces upon Caribbean peoples, the vast majority of them peoples of color. Unequal treatment and a lack of political representation create this inherently unstable, unjust, and uncertain condition for islanders. The cone of uncertainty takes many different forms, from ill health to a lack of economic opportunities, from shuttered schools to massive migration that we have seen out of Puerto Rico since the 2017 hurricanes. So given this very dark picture I have just painted for you, it makes sense to ask, why does art matter after a hurricane? That's exactly the question our panelists will explore today. Art matters to me in this cone of uncertainty because it inspires public resistance to disaster capitalism and corruption. We saw an example of this just this summer in Puerto Rico when political protest songs fueled massive street demonstrations that resulted in the resignation of Governor Ricardo Rosselló in July. That song was called Ricky Te Boté, or Ricky, I Dumped You. It's great. So that's one example of what's called artivism, right? But beyond the idea of just political activism, I think poetry, music, and art all matter after disaster because they can reframe our way of seeing and hearing the world. Art enables us to think of wealth in cultural rather than financial terms. Art offers new forms of ecological awareness. And one example of that is that it can work against the myth of the island paradise that tourists associate with the Caribbean. Most importantly, art can foster solidarity across islands, building relationships across archipelagos and outside of those colonial dynamics that I mentioned. In short, art offers creative resistance to disaster. So I've asked each of the artists today to display or perform his or her work, and then they're going to speak for a few moments about it. I'm not going to take up any more of their time, so I'm going to ask you to read the biographies of the artists in the program as they present. We're going to hear first from Sarabel Santos Negron, then from David Berg, Nicole Delgado, Alfonso Fuentes with Oscar Espina Ruiz, Joe Cosme, and Sally Bernard. I hope that you'll stay for the end for the question and answer period after a conversation among the artists. So thank you very much for coming.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sarabel Santos Negron. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you for coming. And thank you for the invitation, Charlotte, for all the organization and attention. So I am very glad and honored. I just want to share some thoughts about my practice, also about the installation that I am presenting here. I call this the social landscape. So I'll be presenting some images while I am reading. Landscapes sometimes are regarded as physical spaces or as a specific portion of the Earth's surface. It is perceived as the result of human-nature relationships in a given area. Luther Gehling, in Dimensions of the Social Construction of Landscape, said, "Landscapes should be understood as social constructions, spatial entities resulting from individual and societal processes." In my art practice, landscape is the frame where I started to point out the environmental concerns and the social, cultural, and political activities or situations regarding to our Caribbean contemporaneity. Landscapes has the evidence of our social and urban progress, but at the same time, it remarks our decadence and needs. This is because this specific portion of the Earth's surface is understood as a specific spatial entity, and its existence is not negotiable. This piece that I am presenting here, Groundscape Displaced, reflects my interest in the specific portion of the surface. This work was made up by more than 70 printed and handmade tiles using photographs that I took in different towns of Puerto Rico after the hit of the Hurricane Maria in September 20, 2017, 2 years from now. Tomorrow is the anniversary. The towns are Bayamón, Vega Alta, Vega Baja, and Morovis. The grid format of this installation was inspired in the traditional floor of the Puerto Rican houses, specifically my parents' house where I grew up, which was also very affected by the hurricane. Days after the hurricane passed by, I started to look down to the ground, not only because it was the way I did to walk safety over the debris, but because it became part of my reflection of what others' definitions of landscapes could be possible in the middle of this crisis. Looking to the ground means looking to where I am standing, where I am walking, or where I am stranded, in physical, social, and political terms. These groundscapes are part of the current identity because still are the everyday landscapes of many families in Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, and recently in Las Bahamas. In Landscapes, the social construction of nature and the environment, Thomas Grader and Lorraine Garkovic said, landscapes reflect our definition of ourselves through cultural symbols and the transformation of the physical environment. Looking to the ground led me to think about how I can face through my practice the situation that Puerto Rico has been carrying for more than a century. The island is a colony of the United States. There is an unfair, unpayable debt, and the Puerto Ricans are living with an opportunism disguised as pseudo-progress, where only a group of people can benefit from it. So I asked to myself, what is my landscape right now? The landscape with which I have been in contact is made by remains, debris, garbage, plastic, concrete, wood, aluminum, zinc, house appliances, and personal belongings such as clothing, footwear, bed mattress, among others. I see these components as a reflection and the definition of my social and contemporary conditions. This is a toxic environment as a result of our social, cultural, and political practices toward the environment. In Social Formation and Symbolic Landscape, Dennis Cosgrove said, landscape is not merely the world we see, it is a construction, a composition of that world. Landscape is a way of seeing that its own history, but a history that can be understood only as part of a wider history of economy and society. In the Caribbean and Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and now after Dorian or many other atmospheric phenomena that could arise, the environment is a way of seeing the reality and crisis of these places. This puts emphasis on the specific circumstances we are living now, but above all, on the relationship between society and nature. In my experience as an artist, we are used to feel that landscapes and nature is something that is contemplated at a distance, where we are not completely included in it. Landscape seems to be apart from us. It's known we can reach it, but sometimes we forgot we are part of it. I'll call this the notion of detachment. But when we look closely, when we get confronted with the pollution and illness, water contamination, when hurricanes or other climatological events hit, then you notice we are part of this landscape and part of all we see at distance. This is because landscape is a projection of ourselves. Our practices define what landscape is now and promote what landscape could be in the future. We are constantly redefining it. Bill McKibben, in The End of Nature, said, "The world is a different place. There is more blue and less white, more cyclones swirling in the tropics. It's a different earth." And it's also true that we are part of nature. Indeed, over the last few centuries, we have forgotten, to our peril, how much connected we actually are to the rest of the fabric of creation. We didn't create this world, but we are very busy decreating it. Groundscape displays and the sound piece Under Pressure are attached to the Puerto Rican and the Caribbean culture, but not limited to it. These works are an invitation to observe, listen, and identify who we are and where we have been through the individual experiences and memories with the environment, and also analyze where we are standing on in the social construction of this new contemporary landscape. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's David Berg. Coming from St. Croix is a little different from the other artists today. So today is our actually anniversary for Hurricane Maria. So around this time 2 years ago, I was in a hurricane hole. So it's kind of an emotional day for me. In the background, I'm going to be showcasing archival photos from the hurricane that hit the Virgin Islands in 1916. My idea is to showcase that this is something that's not new and has been continuing to happen in the Caribbean for a very long time. Nothing could prepare me for what it was like to go through a Category 5 hurricane. While the stories themselves were traumatic, rebuilding afterward, which continues today, has been the most impactful for my work. With little help from the US government, I explored the Virgin Islands' colonial history has continued to hold us back while we strive to heal, to grow, to move forward. Growing up next to the ocean, I learned the many faces of the wind and the waves. Through the sea, there was often our lullaby. Twice we lost our roof to its temper. Preparing and rebuilding for hurricanes became a natural flow of life, at least for my childhood. Then there was a lull of severe storms and everyone on the island relaxed. I built an entirely new relationship with the sea. The ocean became my canvas, my creative partner, as I developed my photography. Before the hurricane season of 2017, I had plans to showcase a series about the Middle Passage, the sailing route that brought the slaves to the New World. It features images representing African souls who lost during the voyage, either from illness, injury, or often by choice. Many Africans decided to surrender to the waves rather than face whatever lay ahead. Only the ocean could contain so much history and not be ruined by it. Every time I walk in from the beach until the ocean swallows me, I feel the emotion and historical and cultural depths held within it. This connection with the sea was deep and reverent, but did not reflect its agency, because while it's container for all we have poured into it, it also wields the ground power of nature. It refuses to compromise its display of force. We cannot understand, let alone fight its full power, and only watch in awe. A hurricane is like all of a nature shrieking at the top of its lungs. You have no idea when it will end, and when it finally does, the silence is deafening. You have survived, but you have no idea who or what else has or who hasn't. Going outside is like stepping into a parallel universe. Everything has changed. After Irma and Maria, my art was put on hold. First simply surviving and then rebuilding took everyone's full attention. Living became a day-by-day intention, instead of something that happens while we're focusing on each other. At the end of the day, there was no energy for anything else. Just to speak a little bit about my work, I have this series over here. The first one's in the black and white. So we got power back maybe after January, February, where I lived in St. Croix. Around that time, I actually went to Denmark, where, as we spoke about our colonial history, the Virgin Islands were originally owned by the Danish, and we were sold in 1917 to the US government. So we have a very long history of being treated as a colony or as a second-class citizen. And so a lot of our history is actually in Denmark. And I was given a very rare opportunity to be able to go into the archives in Denmark and to actually help them correct some of the metadata and terminology used around the archives. And I spent around most of 2018 doing this, so my aesthetic became black and white and almost like seeing that. So if you see the images here, that's sort of why I wanted to showcase the archival photos. The first series there of the black and white is called the Regrowth series. That was originally a tree that I actually used to shoot a lot of artistic photos into, and actually in the base of the tree, and I had a very strong connection to, and it was actually a tree that was around during our slavery time. So it was a very ancient tree and been around and not been touched and fallen, but Hurricane Maria took it down. And I went back with a model that I had worked with, and we both had a connection with the tree and created that first couple of photos. One of the ladies screaming underwater, I feel, represents the deafening silence I described after the hurricane. If you go through a hurricane, I think some people can understand that, or that silence has its own sound, and the wind is something that you cannot understand what it really can do until you go through it yourself. And the underwater silence, I felt, was something that represented that sound. And then something to touch upon with the lady sinking underwater, it's called Still Here, just to mention the fact that when the hurricane went up to Puerto Rico and into Florida, all the media attention went into those islands, which is fine, but at the same time, A lot of the funding or fundraisers or grants or money or anything that was going to go towards the Virgin Islands was just instantly gone. And we were even not even discussed anymore. On this trip alone, I've been asked multiple times if Hurricane Maria also hit our island too. And I'm getting asked this knowing that I still don't have a roof on my head. So it's something that I wanted to represent that photo that we're still here. So, all right.
Hola, thank you all for being here, and I feel very honored to be part of this event. I want to thank personally Dr. Rogers for organizing this beautiful venue and inviting us to come all the way here to meet you and share our work with you. And also I want to thank Caroline because she did amazing translations of my poetry. I'm gonna be reading poetry to you from my 2 latest books, and we're gonna have the translations projected so that those of you who don't understand Spanish can follow me. But before I read poetry to you, I want to talk a little bit about my current project. I am the director and creator of editorial and graphic experimentation studio in San Juan. It's a small risograph print shop and a micro press. We make handmade books. And it's a place where poetry, design, printmaking, bookmaking, and craft come together. It's an artist-led studio, and we are very into process more than results, even though you can see the results in that table over there. And we also think that collaboration makes every work better. And so we are constantly working hand in hand, literally, with writers, but also visual artists to make all kinds of artist books and beautiful publications. I am showing you our social media and webpage because I think that's the best way to get to know our work, and you can take note and look at them with some time. This is our machine, and I'm gonna share some photos of our studio. This person who you see here, she's my colleague and partner in crime. Her name is Amanda Hernandez, and we work together this project. We've been working together since 2016. And these are photos of a workshop we had about 2 months ago with different visual artists from Puerto Rico who were collaborating with another poet, Yara Lisiaga, who's making a project about the hurricane. Actually, she's Boston-based, and she had a group of amazing artists come to her workshop to learn how to use the machine and so they would be able to design posters using our studio. So that's the risograph machine. Also, I wanted to show you our Instagram page because it's a resource that's very useful to us. Since we are really process-oriented, we like people to know how we work and how our body is involved in every single process. So we not only show books, but we like to show all the little details and steps of the process. I also wanted to talk to you about a book that's very special for us. It's called Buenos Días Colonizados. It's a yellow book on that table. And that book was published 1 year after Hurricane Maria. And the author, it's a social media writer. He had never published before. His name is Amado Martinez Lebron. And he was the most clear-minded person in the aftermath of the hurricane that I knew. And he published beautiful Facebook posts the day after the hurricane and the weeks after. So this book is a collection of his Facebook posts, and it serves as a very up-to-date, like on the spot documentation of what was going on in Puerto Rico. And I wanted to show and talk about this book because we also did small videos and clips, and it gives you a good idea of how every step is a manual step. And this is very important for us because the fact that we use hand tools that are not plugged to any electricity socket saved our life in the months after the hurricane, because it allowed us to keep working, and not only allowed us to keep working, but it was like mental health medicine for us to be able to go to the shop and keep working and using tools. So I would really like, it usually makes beautiful sounds. I don't know why we cannot hear the sounds of it, but it's very audible, the whole process. That machine, for example, helps us make all the paper be in order again after it comes out of the riso machine. Yeah, I think that's basically what I wanted to show. See, that's the final step of every book. That's how we sign it. It's like a embosser. So I'm gonna continue with my poems. And thanks again to Caroline for her translation work. How do I start it? Slideshow. Play from start. Thank you. I'm gonna be reading from 2 books. This one is Días Naturales, and it was written during a cleanup brigade in a farm in Puerto Rico right after the hurricane. Solo la ciudad genera caos. El campo reverdece pronto después del huracán. Bolsillos sin gobierno, donde los animales cantan y la lluvia no nos inunda la conciencia. Empezaron a volver las flores y los pájaros. Se vuelve a construir con madera caída la silla y la mesa y la casa. Llega la noche y that was the first one. Sorry. This is the second one. Llega la noche y pienso en el verbo iluminar, dar color a las cosas, buscar la luz. La luna nueva es la oscuridad de la semilla. El huracán fue exactamente en luna nueva. Pero ¿qué se supone que hacemos con esa información? No tiene nombre tanta pérdida. y todavía hay muertos sin nombre entre nosotros. That's from Días Naturales. And I am gonna read now a couple of poems from this other book called Periodo Especial, which is co-publishing with another independent press from Puerto Rico, Ediciones Agua Dulce. It was published jointly by La Impresora and Ediciones Agua Dulce. And it is called Periodo Especial because I like to make a comparison between Puerto Rico's current economic crisis and the Cuban economic crisis. Like, we have always been, like, history has wanted to separate Puerto Rico from Cuba, and there is a lot of fear about the Cuban reality. And then in the end, we ended up in an economic crisis that's not too far from the Cuban experience. And I try to mirror those two realities in this book. Las casas vacías. Al cabo de un tiempo de regreso, no te escapas de pensar en la renta versus la loza criolla, la pintura con plomo versus los balaustres de cemento y la luz a través de los bloques ornamentales. No te escapas de admirar los medios puntos de las casas vacías que se dejan perder en cada calle. Estas casas vacías con las ventanas tapiadas, estorbos públicos le dicen a las casas de los muertos con los hijos en Estados Unidos. No, tú no te escapas. Tú que has regresado de vivir en los Estados Unidos, no te escapas del deseo de abrir y de habitar sin pagar renta esas casas viejas y vacías. Construcción. Entonces la poesía como un óxido, la marca del salitre en la estructura, la ruina y el derrumbe igual a la belleza, distorsión y percepción entre viga y columna, entre ceja y ceja. Después de la vergüenza sales al sol o al aguacero, carcomida, sin nada que decir. El tiempo dibuja miedo en las paredes, incisión vertical que se aparece. El edificio, en un principio, se construyó bajo el sueño de lo indestructible, pero se tenía en mente un clima distinto en el diseño original. El dique. Sé que hay un torrente de palabras atascado en mi mano, en mi corazón, en mi pensamiento. Ahora temo que se rompa el dique. He visto ríos que se salen de su cauce destruir a mi país. He visto al viento llevarse a mis amigas. No es fácil decir que la tristeza se apoderó de nosotras, que una vez fuimos la gente más feliz del mundo. No es fácil decir la arquitectura de un poema, mientras veo en las paredes de mi casa cómo nacen grietas que se alargan cada día un poco más. And finally, this is, I think, my favorite poem of the book. And it is actually, It was written after a long conversation of my friend Noricel Mazanet, who's the owner of the farm where I wrote this other book. Conversación con Noricel Mazanet. Detrás de la ciudad, entre otras cosas, siembra hojas de varios tipos de orégano, hace pan a la leña, enrolla cigarrillos, hierve 4 huevos y cuela 2 tazas de café. La tala está crecida. La perra chiquita tuvo un accidente, pero se está curando. Teófilo me devolvió a Fidelia, dice, no sé cómo voy a mudar las cabras. Cabo Rojo le palpita en la mirada. Se ve cruzando la isla a pie con su rebaño. ¿Y a ti cómo te trata el país? Me mira y me pregunta. Hace meses que no nos vemos. Hay inteligencia en las renuncias voluntarias. Buscando simplicidad se nos complica la vida. Con el tiempo no se siente igual. Sentadas en el piso de la terraza, tanta cosa importante por hablar entre nosotras. Jueves por la tarde nublada de verano, no hay más resistencia ni más lucha posible. Sentadas en el piso de la terraza, vemos crecer el bambú. Procedo a contarle cosas de mis pobres matas. Ella piensa en el futuro todavía, más allá del gobierno y más acá de teorías conspiracionistas. Su forma de hacer revolución es contundente. Pesticida y colmena no son metáfora en esta casa. Confieso llorar de rabia en la oficina de patentes municipales. Por más en contra que estoy de la Junta de Control Fiscal, yo tampoco encuentro mi sitio en el performance de lo político. Sin tiempo para preámbulos cordiales ni manifestaciones pacíficas, nos ocupa el trabajo y nos habita la espesura. En las manos reverbera el pulso. No es el país, es la tierra. No es el país, es la tierra. No es el país, es la tierra. No es el país, es la amistad. Gracias.
Hello, I'm Alfonso Fuentes. Weeks before Hurricane Maria passed through Puerto Rico on September 20th, 2017, I had been working on the clarinet concertos draft to be dedicated to Oscar Espina Reese, my friend here. He is going to play with me the next piece. But after Maria's hit, I no longer felt continuing with previous musical ideas because I was in a new emotional dimension. In my case, I spent the hurricane in my mother-in-law house located in the metropolitan area of Hato Rey, San Juan, with my family and our 2 dogs. I had left my own house alone, located in the mountains of Trujillo Alto, which is 45 minutes away from San Juan. The next day after Maria's pace, my son and I went to see our house condition. Along the way, I observed hundreds or thousands of trees on the ground. There were many impossible roads because of the amount of debris of all kinds. It was hard and risky for my son and me to have gone. When we arrived, we observed that all our trees that my wife, my children's, parents-in-law, my parents and I planted decades ago has fallen, must reap it from roots. A week later, in a moment of sensitivity, I told all the fallen trees of my country that one day I will write a word for them as a gratitude for having faced the fury of Maria's wind. For the protagonist's stay in our family system and for its importance to life itself. That's when I started writing Oda para los árboles caídos, Ode to the Fallen Trees. During the first week of my writing, we had no communication. We didn't know what was going on. In fact, why we ignored the state of the country. In that period, I wrote at night on my mother-in-law house balcony using a portable battery-liter piano and music papers, lighting up with a headlamp. Then there was silence and total darkness. By the way, I didn't hear the sound of nocturnal insect nor birds. Puerto Rico's nights are always filled with an intense sound of singing insects, one of the most notable being the coqui. During the day, I collaborate in the debris collection while support my family and our neighbors. In the next 4 weeks, I worked this composition alongside the eternal roar of portable electricity generator machines whose sounds border the house 24 hours each day, and make long lines in order to get into the supermarket or pour gasoline in the car, and suffer the stress of the traffic fighting as all the traffic lights were useless. The Conservatory of Music classes, where I work as a professor of composition and orchestration, remained interrupted for 2 months. I felt that the act of writing this work was good to my family because I was focused on a spiritual activity despite of this devastation, and was sending them a message of peace and hope. It was during this period when we start learning about the state of the situation of the country. Gradually, we learned about missing and deceased persons who several months later exceed 3,000, although our people version indicate were more than 4,000. Still today, there are families whose homes don't have roof, and there are signs of post-trauma in areas of society among a series of social, political, and economic conflict. Some of them similar to what of many world First Nations. On the other hand, have made us stronger and more determined society. The work Ode to the Fallen Trees, which Oscar and I are about to perform, is the first of the 2 movements that make up the concerto for clarinet and symphony orchestra, as I said before, dedicated to him. While the second movement is happy and brilliant, this one pretends to be reflexive and thoughtful. We will be performing the closest version to the original composition, since I made some important change during this time. It's featured a 2-part subject, which is the only thematical material used. The work is not programmatic. It has no intention necessarily to describe Maria's event. Of course, it captures some of my emotion during that writing period. It's simply a onboard work dedicated to all the fallen trees of my country and of the world, knowing that soon all will rise and grow stronger. Just like our native mahogany and oak trees, Puerto Ricans are resilient, and from our spirit grows branches of solidarity. Of course, we will perform it with piano, whose sound, color, intention, and spatial dimension are very far from a large symphony orchestra, but you can have an idea. We hope to have the pleasure of your attendance at some point when Oscar performed the entire concert with an orchestra. Es lo próximo. On behalf of Oscar Espina-Ruiz and my own, we thank Professor Charlotte Rogers, the Department of Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, all the sponsors of this event, and the University of Virginia for the opportunity to allow us to share with you all our art and history. Thank you. When you go to Puerto Rico, don't forget to go to the Conservatory of Music to greet you personally. So I will wait for you in Puerto Rico.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm pretty small. My name is Joe Cosme. I'm also from Puerto Rico, and well, I am going to talk a little bit about the experience and then go further into the piece. Okay, so after graduating art school, I kind of quit arts for years and just worked for advertising companies for taking photos and such. But when Hurricane Maria passed, I kind of got like super inspired again and decided to go back to creating. So here's a little bit about how that went. After Maria and being dramatically changed overnight, inspired by the rage and indignation I felt towards the lack of attention and total dishonesty from our local and federal government and how it's responded to our people, I finally found my voice again. I decided to use this rage and use it to create art in a form of artivism, as Dr. Rogers mentioned earlier, in order to portray the reality that we were living in. Truly living during this time, and still to this day, it feels like an eternal purgatory in Puerto Rico. The government took advantage of our vulnerability during this time to play political games, while people died of hunger, sickness, or even took their own lives as a means to escape this limbo. Needless to say, the corruption, the corruption in Puerto Rico has long been a subject matter so as to, there's even a saying that it says, everybody steals. You just have to vote for whoever is going to steal less. And still, also, people were a little bit in denial during this time about that, which has changed, obviously, recently with the chat. That said, Hurricane Maria's passing, I feel, unleashed a series of events that further evidence these circumstances. In fact, I've come to believe that the hurricane not only took away our homes' roofs, but also took away the blanket that was covering all the lies, corruption, and deceit. And it left everything absolutely exposed. We have been disrespected, mocked, and humiliated by both of our governments, and no superhero came to save us. We, the people, took the matters in our own hands and held each other's backs. I saw Puerto Rico being rebuilt by the people itself, and that amongst the chaos was a beautiful thing to witness. This was a lesson in resiliency and love I could have never learned in a classroom, but only in the flesh. I myself went to work as a volunteer for many groups to help people who were less fortunate and give them food, water, supplies, and all that stuff. And as a photographer, I also documented a little bit of it, which I brought a little bit of the photos, some of them. As we've been saying before, this really was an experience that changed us dramatically as people. And, well, going into this piece, it's pretty much a tarot reading on what happened chronologically. The first tarot deck created was by Beowulf Wolf in the 18th century, and it was mostly about like a choose your own path reading. So I was inspired by that sense and created an Arcana Majora, which is a lesser amount of cards. I'm currently working on the second part, which is the Minora with 50 cards, so that it'll be 78 in total. This is how I have presented it before in a wood panel, because it's usually what we use to cover windows and doors. So I thought it would look more relevant to the circumstance. I also, when I created the cards, thought I should inform what was going on and explain what each card represents, because not many people know exactly what happened unless they went through it. And so that's why I wrote the book, which explains everything in English and Spanish so that everybody could understand. And then this is the other piece that's featured. It's Welcome to Paradise, which is inspired by a popular phrase in Puerto Rico that it's like, I live where your vacation. The photographic series, Welcome to Paradise, is a metaphorical representation and self-portrait of how Puerto Rico has always been seen as a vacationing and investing resort for visitors, but Puerto Ricans can barely live there. The island has always been the island has been exploited for the pleasures of visitors, tourists, bankers, investors, while the citizens are being ignored and treated like second class. The title rubs off as a cynical undertone to make people reflect on how Puerto Rico is portrayed to Northern Americans versus the reality we live, which is in a rapidly sinking modern-day ecology. So that's the second piece, and these are some of the photographs I took. This was in Comerío, which was severely affected, and still, like, every time I get on a plane to go to Puerto Rico or come back, I still see roofs with blue tarps 2 years later. This is also in Comerío and Naranjito. This is a gas station. Pretty much explains how everything looked, which was very traumatizing for everybody who comes out and is used to seeing everything green, and all of a sudden there's not one tree standing. And this was also in Naranjito, and the car there is carrying 2 barrels of water that they were taking from the river nearby. And, well, that is it.
Hi, I am Sally Bernard, and I'm from the, can you hear me guys okay? Okay. I'm from the Florida Keys, and I actually had a whole kind of talk prepared for about the last 6 months, and then about half an hour ago, I'm like, oh, sorry. About half an hour before the coming here, I was like, let me complicate my life and make things a little more challenging for me by kind of going off the cuff. Can you hear me? Okay. On September 5th, I evacuated the Florida Keys, pretty much with the entire state of Florida. The Florida Keys are a string of islands. It's one road in and one road out. So I was evacuating north, and literally the whole state was trying to find their way because we didn't know where the storm was going. The storm was East Coast, West Coast. I evacuated to St. Pete Beach, where I thought that was the hurricane. It was going to come there as well. Ground zero ended up being Cudjoe Key, Summerland Key, and up to Big Pine Key. I live on Summerland, and you hear Ground Zero on the news, but you don't know what Ground Zero looks like. You know, I've been through many hurricanes. I've been through Wilma. I've seen my house under 4 feet of water before. I made it through that. I was fine. I'm like, all right, we'll see what happens when I get back. 2 weeks later, I was allowed back into the Keys, which was a shock. There was a lot of anxiety when I was away, trying to figure out, you know, what was my life going to look like when I got back. But when I actually did get back, the reality was something that you don't quite come back from it. That the image is stuck in your head. And the only way I could describe it was a war zone. I remember thinking, I'm like, I guess this is what Afghanistan looks like. Every tree was on its side. Plumbing was, you know, any pipe that was underground was above ground. My neighbor's house, I didn't have a neighbor. I don't know where the house went. I mean, and not, I'm just talking about the roof gone, but the house was just, it was just an empty lot. I said in my application for this that everything that was on the inside of people's homes was on the outside. So you'd walk down the street, and actually Sarah Bell's piece illustrates that very well, that everything that was on the inside of somebody's house was on the outside. So it was, you know, bowls, dishes, pillows, underwear, bank statements for, you know, a piece of a tax return. It was just everything. And everything that was on the inside of a person, the individuals, was also on the outside. And it's if I get emotional, I'm sorry. It's a very strange thing to see an entire community raw. And there's no, hey, how you doing? I'm good. It's impossible. It's how are you doing? And they don't even have to say a word. I mean, I can see it in some of the faces who've gone through it. And it's strange because it's on a community level. I mean, we all know what it is to, let's say, lose a family member and you have that pain and, oh, I feel really bad for you. But it's a different thing to when you go to the grocery store, when you go to the bank. It's everywhere, so you can't escape it. While we were watching Sandra Cintron's talk today about the Museum of Art in Puerto Rico, I don't have any images, and I'm kind of glad that I don't, because I've seen a few, but seeing a similar experience of sweeping mud, moldy walls, water, it was like, ay. And she said several times that it changes you, and it does. And it doesn't quite go away. You think it goes away, and then out of somewhere, you'll see something, and you're like, oh, it's still there. The experience is just, it's kind of in your DNA. So this conference is called Coasts in Crisis. And what I take away from this title is the fact that our coasts are indeed in crisis, to me, simply because of climate change and our development. There's a new normal of storm intensities that we can't just hunker down through anymore. Like I said before, at my time in the Keys, we'd sit through categories 1, 2, 3. Occasionally, we think about a 4. Well, I'll just go to this friend's house that's on stilts and on concrete. I don't have that mentality anymore after having seen what it did to the Keys. This issue is not only environmental, as Dr. Rogers says, it's economic, it's social, it's political. I think as the last speaker, and also a speaker that's not from the Caribbean, not from the Virgin Islands, not from Puerto Rico, it's important for me to make the point that my situation was very different than yours. And now the large part of the Bahamas. Key West is part of the continental United States. It has several Coast Guard bases. We have a large military presence. We have a significant revenue source for tourism for the state of Florida. We have a very wealthy tax base. A lot of these people are second homeowners. Our geographical location is important in drug interdiction, which is a big moneymaker in the United States. Nobody is going to let the Keys go without or suffer for too long. National Guardsmen guarding the entrance outside of Florida City, which is the city before you come into the Keys. So one road in, one road out. There's National Guardsmen there, making sure that you lived in the Keys, not strangers, no non-residents were allowed in. In order to get into my neighborhood, I had to show my driver's license to prove that I lived in that neighborhood. This is a level of safety and protection and what I call privilege that we had that so many other places did not get. And it's really unfair. And it's illustrated with Katrina as well. They didn't have that kind of protection. But all those reasons that I listed for the Keys, the inequity is really apparent when we get these disasters. So how does this relate to art? My paintings are over here, and they're not actually related to the hurricane, but they came out of the hurricane. I lost my studio. I lost most of my equipment and my supplies. I started painting with mixed media after the hurricane. I would walk through my neighborhood and find things that I would hold on to for, it didn't make any sense, but I just wanted to hold on to it. And I called it emotional hoarding, and I would just kind of hold on to it. And then I started incorporating it into my art. And the piece on the right is part of my house, the wood, and the other piece has some little trinkets that were under the house. So the hurricane directly changed my work, because before the hurricane, I would make pretty pictures. It was about the aesthetic and making an aesthetically pleasing piece of art. After the hurricane, creating art was healing. I mean, that was a simple answer. It was simply, it was my therapy. It felt good. Sorry. After the storm, the work was created as a means to heal. My work started to become more narrative about my experience and definitely more process-driven. So now my work is literally building, using hammers, using nails, and like Nicole said, there's something about being able to use your hands. I don't know if it's trying to get some control or power back, but it feels really good. It's very therapeutic. So I think that when you have twice seen most of your possessions and your home submerged or swept or blown away, metaphorically, you realize that your slate can be wiped clean at any time. And taking risks with your art seems less risky. And it actually becomes important to take those risks as an artist. So I'd say that the storm affected me directly in that I'm more comfortable in using a voice that I was timid to use, or I didn't think it was important. And now I'm like, I got something to say and I want you to hear it. So currently on that path that I'm now taking, I received a grant to create a series of work exploring my mixed race heritage and others and claiming identity. And what does identity mean? I'm half Belgian and half Haitian. And so that's a kind of European, Caribbean, complicated, experience to reconcile. I wanted to thank Professor Rogers and everyone involved for gathering this group of people, because it's the exchange of ideas between artists and educators, scientists, linguists, that seems to me the most effective way to try and sort through these complicated issues. And because you pull one string of economics and it's attached to culture, and you pull in the culture thing and it's attached to race or gender, and it's a big ball of string. So all the conversations that we've had, I'm really excited to go home with these new thoughts, and I'm really excited to get back into the studio with what's happened here. And the last point I'd like to make is I was talking with another artist that was invited about some of the constraints that many professions have. And one of them is language. And in most professions, there's things to worry about like optics, marketing, board members, profit margins, sensitivities of students. Even scientists in the state of Florida were being censored in their research papers and were not allowed to use the term climate change. Bananas, okay? You spend, I don't know how many thousands of dollars to go to school and become a scientist and talk about data, and the governor of Florida says it doesn't exist. So as artists, though, I think we're really lucky to not be beholden to anybody except ourselves, our vision, and our ideas. And we get to say things that others might not be able to. And so that's why I'm really excited about this month-long program and that it's going to be done, because I think it's crucial that artists are part of the conversation, because we do have that luxury to say whatever we want. And so I'm very excited.
Thank you. Thank you so much to those artists. I think Sally really wrapped it up beautifully in saying that artists get to say whatever they want, and we have the privilege of being here today and listening to them. Also, I think this event is unique because even folks from the Caribbean have challenges in getting together and understanding about each other's work. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to ask the panelists to please come sit here at this other table. You see we have a lot going on the stage today. And so I'm going to ask them to just talk to each other for a few moments, because we rarely have that opportunity. And after just a minute or two of that, I'm going to ask those of you who are still here, thank you for staying, to ask questions of your own. Okay. We've heard a lot already today about art as a healing practice. I think that that's something that many of us have come to expect. But I'd also like to turn to our artists and ask them, what has art meant to you amid disaster that perhaps you were not expecting, right? Have there been surprises here for you amid your artistic process in the last 2 years? So I'm going to let everyone think about that for a moment and ask you to come have a seat, and I'll ask you to think about your own questions here for a moment. So,
I would like to say that after Hurricane Maria, I had to revisit my own practice and think about how I can embrace the situation and also face the reality that Puerto Rico is having. I'm talking about the the political situation and economic as well. So I think that the hurricane changed me, the way I approach these situations. Now I think that my work is more political and less contemplative, even when you can contemplate it. But I am more aware of that. So I think Hurricane Maria, make me to put the feet on the ground, literally.
Thank you.
Well, for us, I like to talk about it in plural because it's me and Amanda working together. And I think that the idle time after the hurricane was very important for our work because it gave us a moment to stop and think about what we were doing. And I relate to what Jo was saying about her not wanting to work on publicity, and we were up to that time doing a lot of commercial work also that we were not that excited about. But we were doing it because we were learning to print, and it was part of what we did. We didn't really think about it. But those months where everything got really slow, we learned how to talk about our project, and we learned how to apply for funding. And that's meant a big difference because we have been able to choose what kind of projects we actually do from La Impresora, and we try now to do our poetry publications and to choose who we work with and not just accept any kind of commercial work. So that was a big difference, to take time to learn to talk about what we do.
Well, I think we're all on a very similar page in terms of that we put the commercial work or the work that was not about what was going on in the current situation. I was asked a lot to document what was being seen around the island, which I did take part of, but then when I was asked to create a series or to speak about the hurricane, everyone expected me to showcase the documentary work, but I instead did underwater photos, which was very surprising to people, but that was how I dealt with what I was processing, how I felt I wanted to speak about the hurricane situation that we were going through on the island. And then especially with, which we were talking about last night in terms of that part of, I think, part of the problems that we've been seeing with hurricanes, that gentrification has increased a lot on the island. So a lot of artists have been pushed into a situation on St. Croix that they need to, what we would call snowbirds or tourists, to make art to be for them. I'd rather fight and do artwork that's speaking against that kind of mentality. So.
Yeah, I noticed we didn't have a single beach image in any of our art, and I think that was probably intentional on everyone's part. Well, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience, and we'll have 2 mics going around, one on each side. So if you want to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we're also going to invite the artists to continue to participate and speak with each other and with our audience. So, yeah.
I have a question for the artists, but I'd like to address it to Mr. Fuentes, because I found the piece very moving that you performed, but also because I teach composition, music composition here at this university, so it's a language that I can address, but it's really for everybody. I was thinking about the piece uses sequenced patterns, right? But these are not just patterns that are kind of meandering around. They're directed linearly towards the extremes of the instrument, both instruments, and approaching the very, very high register of the clarinet, or the very low. There's phrases that result in explosions of noise in the bass of the piano. And this approach to the instruments, on the one hand, it reminded me that the clarinet and the piano themselves are also fallen trees themselves, and it also suggested that, you know, it's like you're looking past the instrument, like the instruments are not enough to contain the power of the expression that is needed for this, you know, and I was imagining you out on the balcony composing this piece and being constrained by the orchestra. And I'm wondering, you know, this is really about tool use as much as it is about, you know, the music, but all of our instruments, all for creating art. When are they not enough for us to express the things? They were made for different times, by different places. They were made for different forms of expression, perhaps. And I'm really curious about that, like how we think beyond the confines of our instruments and our media. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I've been working with Alfonso for quite a while, and he always searches for the limits, that I can tell you. But it is true that in this piece in particular, I think you described it very, very eloquently, very clearly, that there is this clear direction with repetition and gradually, I guess, either crescendo, gradually louder or gradually higher to the extremes. Yeah, that's very, very clear. I don't know if that is a cause of María or a cause of his style, but I think it was enhanced by María. I mean, he will tell you his side of things, but Alfonso and I were going back and forth about this concerto, and then the hurricane came. And then everything came into focus. You know, I'm composing. I have no electricity, but I'm composing. Here is, you know, the 14 pictures of the first 14 pages of the score that I just took on my iPhone. Can you please check them and give me some feedback and so on? And suddenly everything comes into focus. It makes me remember Italy, right? You want to think, oh, I need peace of mind and political peace to be creative, but actually it tends to be the contrary. The turmoil kind of sets the alarm and brings everything into focus. I think that's one of the themes I've been hearing quite a bit, and certainly the concerto is a result of that as well. So that's my little observation, but he is the composer.
Yeah, well, also, this composition I made in different way from the preceded composition, because I just was writing a piece. Just without any plans, just write. And that's it. No question, no reflections, just write the piece. That's it. So this is very different from the way I always compose a piece. And maybe, well, it's supposed to be, or is because of María, because of my emotion, because of being with my family. It's a privilege to be with my family together. We share all the love all the time. We are always together, hug, you know, it's a family that hug and always say thank you for everything. Thank you. The word thank you is so important and so powerful. Thank you. So this composition, I just made a composition. That's, you know, I have no big words, no philosophy. Just as Nike, that you say, just do it. Just I did.
I could just say in terms of instruments that make the art and with other photographers, and there's something that I dealt with in terms of, I wonder if you guys had the similar situations with no power. You couldn't charge your gear, you couldn't charge laptops, and so simplest task of just shooting, and then what you're gonna do with it that night usually would come home and put into your computer. At that point, I was actually using a tower computer, and that was not an option for months because I didn't want to hook it up to the generator, and the laptop I had was actually dying out. So there was like a 2-month period I was just buying memory cards and not seeing the work, which was something that was unusual for me and different at the time. And I ended up, like the underwater photos, they're shot with a GoPro, and that was just part of the limitations of trying to get equipment and gear, not having fresh water to clean the gear. And so you get put into a situation that you are more extreme with your art and trying to make it annoying, I guess. So that was something that, and just the simple things that you just can't charge your laptop that night. So while you work, so.
Thank you very much. I have a question for you about your comment about, several of you said about sort of being forgotten after a short time after the hurricane came through. And I'm wondering what kind of opportunities you see for that, to try to reverse that. Are there no opportunities? Are there some? What is your advice as artists to people that are listening? I had the opportunity, and I'm a scientist, and I went in May to a meeting in Loquillo, and I have to say, I was shocked that the lab still did not have power, so up in the mountains, 2 years later. You know, that's just a personal example of, wow, I did not hear that. I did not know that. So how do we use your art beyond, you know, to the boundaries as far as you can get them for people to be appreciative and to understand?
Well, the conference is an example of that recently, right? Thanks to Dr. Rogers. So thank you for presenting us, thinking that they may want to listen, and indeed, they listened. So definitely that's one way. I mean, art is a reaction, brings things into focus, is therapeutic, and at the same time, it communicates a very strong message. So the minute we get the voice to send that message out there, we'll be doing that. So thank you, Dr. Rogers.
I also think that we are more aware about how information gets to us, and that we really cannot trust the media, and that we're really the one responsible for looking for information. And just keeping that in mind, one person at a time, and doing your own research. And the information is out there, even though if it's not in the news. And it's easy to find, you just have to take the initiative to look for it.
I think, well, just to go on to this point, that the art, I think, is also a start, and I'm grateful that Professor Rogers brought up the colonial history, and it's part of my work, a significant part recently, because I feel part of what is happening and we're being forgotten about is this mentality that we are just a colony, we're not belong, we're just owned. And it's something that I feel the art starts a conversation that leads to the bigger picture of speaking of what should be the future of how we are treated as American citizens, rather than just second-class citizens. And with the current administrations and the communication about he only recently saw Category 5 hurricanes, and then also this mentality of selling properties or buying lands again being brought up in our colonial history, I think is a big negativity, and just showcases why we're being forgotten in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, because we are just looked upon as something that could be sold or bought like other places. Yes.
I have your mic.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Yes, no? So I was curious about what your experience has been like while you're here at this conference, so to speak, is you're here and you're artists and you're presenting, but as a result, you're also re-experiencing a lot of what you've been through, and what have been some of your processes to preserve yourself during this time, you know, some of the self-care and stepping away from the heavy discussions that we're having.
I'll start. Some of the self-care is knowing when to step away. Sometimes it's actually 2 weeks ago, and I've been discussing this with some of the artists. You know, I knew this trip was coming up, and I'm looking at the National Hurricane Channel, and I'm just seeing storms spinning off of Africa, you know, and I'm I'm like, I cannot handle this. And why are they having a conference in September? I mean, I had to do an interview with Etsy and Surf about the hurricane, and I'm like, I literally can't do this because everything is coming back up. And then eventually the hurricanes kind of popped away, and we all made it here. But it is knowing when to step away. I've never been one to watch the Weather Channel during hurricane season because it is a commercial venture. And it's horrible. And you mentioned the term disaster capitalism, which I know what that is because I've experienced it. I've never heard that term. But it's gross. It's really, our bottled water all had logos from Progressive on it. It's like vultures. These organizations and capitalistic organizations come down. They're helping though, but I need that water. So part of the self-care is knowing when to tamp down the rage so that you can get through stuff. But what I'm totally digging about being here is having conversations with these people. We had dinner last night and just learning new ways and in different languages too. There was a word that Nicole mentioned,
Autogestión.
Autogestión. I'm obsessed with this word, and I know in Latin, gestation, autogestation, and it was talking about the power of like ourselves to not
Take matters in our hands.
to take matters into our own hands. And your question about journalism, or not journalism, but it made me think of journalism. How come we don't hear about St. Croix? How come? It made me think maybe we need some journalists at these future conferences to bring that up. So I think I got off course, but being here, the exchange of ideas. And also I came in with some biases from my past, and I also used to live in Puerto Rico, and I love when people shatter my either prejudices or biases that I carry that I didn't even know I was carrying because I thought it was the facts. So this is why these get-togethers are really important, just to check ourselves and learn.
For me, I'm representative of islands, the people that were not part of a conversation or has been, but very small voice, and it should have been a larger voice. So I kind of remind myself all the time that this was not about me. My artist statement was read by everyone at my job, and they put all their opinion into it, what I read today. And I've been in constant contact with every individual, the person I stayed with during Hurricane Maria, we've been talking about. And the interview, I know a lot of us spoke about the interview that we've done was very emotional because we had to speak directly about what we went through during the hurricane. And immediately after, I called individuals in St. Croix to talk to them. And so that's been part of my self-care and a constant reminder that this is a lot larger than me.
Well, I would say that part of my self-care is to share, to talk about the situation and realize that I'm not alone. So when last night we had dinner and we talked about our perspective, I reconfirmed that we are all of us talking the same thing, trying to do something. So it's like to make community. And I think that is the best way to take care of yourself when you share your thoughts and try to do something together.
Well, I agree with Sarabel that making bonds with people is very healing. And I think that after the hurricane, that has become like a core issue and a thing that we take very important in our process. And every person we work with at La Impresora is like part of the family. We try to work together and create bonds and make our relationship stronger, because that's the network that helps us survive. And I think that we are less individualistic and more community oriented, and it's been very important to make that part of our work.
Okay, I think that we have come to the end of a long and fruitful and beautiful discussion. So I would just like to thank the audience. Thank you for coming and listening. I think listening is one of our most important tasks, right? As people who care about those who live in hurricane zones and want to see justice for them. So also, thank you to these fabulous and many artists for all of their work and for coming here and sharing with us today. So we look forward to seeing you all in a digital exhibit of the event sometime in the future. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks for being here.